Just a quick, A, B, or C, just to the issue Rick mentioned, Afghanistan. Is the current pullout plan too hasty, too slow, or about right? How do you feel about it?
Well, I can't be precise because we're dealing here with so many moving parts that I don't think anyone can be terribly precise or categorical in their judgment, but I think it's about right. I think we shouldn't start right now, and we certainly shouldn't start because of the tragic events that happened recently, because that could really quickly be translated into a kind of semi-panicky withdrawal. But I think we have to disengage. But what is equally important is that the process of disengagement be accompanied by a dialogue, to the extent it's possible, with at least some segments of the Taliban, with the Afghan government participating in it, and this regional umbrella, so that the countries that will be affected by what happens after we leave are encouraged to participate in efforts to anticipate what needs to be done and to share in it. Because while we will, of course, be grievously affected by some major collapse as we disengage, the people who will pay the price in the longer run, are going to be all of the neighbors of Afghanistan as this thing spreads, as Pakistan begins to ferment and explode, or as Central Asia begins to boil, or as the central parts of Russia where 30 million Muslims live begin to be volatile and so forth.
Question, yes ma'am, right here. You, yes, white shirt, perfect. State your name and affiliation, please.
Thank you. Laura Schultz from USAID. Thank you so much. I was wondering if I could ask you a question about the Middle East. It's been a little more than a year since we saw some of the dramatic transitions in the Arab Spring, Arab transitions. What would be your assessment and thoughts in terms of U.S. policy over the past year in the region? And what would you advise in terms of the priorities and issues that should shape USG approach moving forward? Thank you.
Well, I think we have to face the fact that the era of American paramountcy in the region is coming to a gradual end. You know, we weren't dominant in that region until after World War II, when we replaced the British and the French. And we were welcomed as such. We're less welcome today. And we are increasingly, I think, being gradually forced out by a domestic self-assertion, which is nationalistic and religious, depending on the country involved. So that, for example, when I went to the White House, we had good relations with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey, the four most important countries in the region. It's much more mixed today. Maybe with one of them we still have a good relationship, but it's a little bit mixed. With all the others, it's sort of at a lower level of intensity and closeness. We flubbed the peace process. We weren't prepared to do what a mediator has to do, to be active and explicit and persistent. I think maybe if the Muslim Brotherhood takes over gradually in Egypt, it might become more engaged because of the obvious geopolitical interest of Egypt in this problem being resolved. And they seem to be pointing towards exercising some influence on the Hamas to accommodate with the Fatah in the pursuit explicitly of peace with Israel, which includes the premise that Israel is here to stay, if there is a genuine compromise and not a one-sided accommodation. That might be perhaps a positive alternative, but I doubt very much that at this stage we are going to be able to undertake what it seemed so hopeful several years ago. Maybe if the president wins big, and if he wants to give it one more try, it'll be worth it. But you know, things have changed. The public opinion in Israel is dissatisfied with the status quo, but is increasingly concerned as to whether maybe there'll have to be one state. The Palestinians are, I think, frustrated and feeling rather hopeless right now. And on top of it, we don't know how long, for example, Saudi Arabia is going to be stable. And we don't know whether the military Muslim Brotherhood duopoly in Egypt is going to endure, or whether it's going to move towards more assertive, more fundamentalist posture.
Yes, in the front row, right here. Purple. Okay, white.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Brzezinski. I'm Shannon Hughes with Control Risks. Could you comment on Operation Eagle Claw and the evolution of special forces to today, particularly because President Obama tends to rely heavily on the U.S. Navy SEALs? And then my second question is, could you comment on the targeted drone strikes in Pakistan? Thank you.
Well, what do you want me to say about the first one? I mean, what is the issue?
From how Operation Eagle Claw influenced the evolution of the special forces and their use today. Kind of compare and contrast the history and from your time to today's use, and also on Obama's use of the targeted drone strikes.
Well, I understand the question.
Okay.
Well, the other one is quite obvious, it seems to me, that we have become more efficient. You know, you become more efficient the more you try it. And in warfare, the only way to become more efficient is to engage in fighting, paying the price that's involved, and you develop skills, and you develop also means to be used that are specially designed for that kind of missions, and so forth. So I think we're doing pretty well if you're judging it purely in terms of performance. I think these missions are now undertaken with a degree of professionalism and skill which probably no other country can match right now, because no other country has been that engaged and has been so sustained in its efforts to develop a serious capability. As far as the drones are concerned, well, that depends where they're used and against whom. If you're using them in a foreign country which is not your enemy officially, but which is causing you trouble, then of course you realize that you will be also creating political trouble, not only for them, but for yourself. So some degree of self-restraint is necessary. But on balance, I have to say that nothing succeeds in warfare like success. And if you manage to kill enough of your opponents, you're going to be successful. And that, to some extent, that's what the drones are being used for, insofar as the top echelons of the movements or organizations that are hostile to us are concerned.
All right, your turn.
Diana Liddy Dugan, CSIS and Cyber Century Forum. Zbig, with your wonderful penchant to bring logic, history, and reality together, could you turn those traits for a moment to North Korea? As you know, historically, Korea is one of the most homogenized, historical, cohesive countries historically in the world. The North has massive hydroelectric mineral power, and obviously part of the population is helping the Iranians build nuclear capabilities, and the other half is starving to death. And meanwhile, we have a continuous circus of coupling nuclear capabilities with a human aid, food aid and other things. Is there no way, and also the six-party talks, at least three of the six have interests that are not necessarily either compatible with the South Koreans or the US. And is there no way to have some kind of economic sidebar approach to dealing with the starving population and the massive basic capabilities and resources of the country, when we have continually had just a not only lack of success, but just international pratfalls, and no one seems to be paying any attention to the other capabilities of North Korea?
Well, I think we're paying some attention. I mean, we have, for example, made an arrangement with them to provide them with food.
But it's still coupled.
But it is being coupled with conduct which is a threat to North Korea's neighbors. I mean, what is the purpose of that test that they are planning to conduct? They have defied the international community in conducting nuclear tests, in conducting weaponization, in developing rockets. You can't separate these things entirely. And we are also dealing with a situation in which we don't have control over it. We are a party to a process in which several other parties are involved, some of whom are quite important, like particularly China, which has its own interests and wants to preserve them. And China, I think, is very concerned about the consequences for itself if there be an explosion of some sort in North Korea, or for that matter, if the communist regime in North Korea was threatened. Because I think on the whole, the current Chinese elite still feels more comfortable with having a dependent North Korea and China than perhaps a united Korea, which could be quite vital and strong. And look how the North Koreans are doing on the world scene. So the Chinese are being very careful here and prudent and calculating, but as a consequence, creating very little room for maneuver and for basic changes. I think we're stuck basically with this kind of, yes, nibbling away at the problem, but we cannot impose a solution. Are we just going to give them anything they want, no matter what they do? No matter how they either treat their population or, more importantly, in the short run, how they treat the South Koreans? On this issue, for example, I have a somewhat different view than the president with whom I work closely and for whom I have enormous respect and affection. He is much more of what I sense you are in terms of his orientation. He would like, in a sense, to give a real college try to an all-out effort at accommodation with the North Koreans.
No, I'm just talking separating economic from
Well, that's what it in fact becomes, because the others don't move, and on economic, we give. So, you know, that's what the question arises, what will it produce in terms of the stability between the North and the South? I mean, look at the incidents involving the islands some time ago, the shelling, the blowing up of the South Korean corvette. Go back a little bit, the assassination of a good part of the South Korean cabinet. Go back again, the attempt to kill the president of South Korea. I mean, there is a record here that we cannot entirely disregard. So I think the best way we can operate is essentially to see if we and the Chinese can begin to exercise an influence which promotes real changes in North Korea, not confined to just one isolated sector, but through some interactive process. It doesn't have to be strictly conditional. We don't do this unless you do that. It could be, we'll do a little bit of this, but then we're going to wait and see if you do a little bit of that. Otherwise, it really becomes a kind of politically neutralized undertaking which doesn't in any way confine the scope of potential risks with a regime which in many respects is one of the most brutal in the world and one of the most unpredictable politically.
So we only have a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask quick question, quick answer, quick question, quick answer, and then we'll be done. So yes, ma'am, right here, stand up with the black shirt. Thank you.
Priscilla Clapp, retired State Department, Foreign Service. I'd like to go back to China for a minute. Do you think the Chinese leadership, the Chinese system of government has the capacity to develop strategic vision in time to actually work with us on some of these things effectively? I'm concerned about their obsession with how the rest of the world can contribute to China's economic development and not actually thinking about how they can contribute to solving some of the bigger problems.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know whether, you know, they're going to be particularly interested in the kind of vision I'm talking about, although I do have some indications that they are interested in what was said. But don't forget, they have 6,000 years of statecraft. They have a tradition. They have a perspective, which has stood them well. And I think that gives them confidence in dealing with the world. And they may think that we are overly preoccupied with the future because we have no past to draw on. So, you know, I have respect for the Chinese. I think they're acting prudently and carefully and very deliberately. And I'm not sure that the rest of us are contributing to their development. Their development over the last 30 years has been largely domestically driven. Now they're beginning to reap some benefits from it because they can now begin to play the game of reciprocity and of manipulation and of penetration. But they got to where they got by their own efforts. So they have reason to be confident. I am more worried about the possibility of some decline in the quality of Chinese leadership because it's a bureaucratically self-selected leadership, and that over time could decline. as the Soviet leadership did. And that could produce serious problems for them.
Last question over here. It better be a good one. Right there. No pressure.
Thank you. Bela Gadon, Embassy of Hungary. Very quick question about Central Eastern Europe. You mentioned that you would like to see increased discussion and dialogue with Russia and perhaps enhanced cooperation with Turkey. What role, if at all, could Central Eastern European countries play in that in official US policy, foreign policy, given your background and given the policy that you pursued when in government in the 70s? Thank you.
Well, I think one looks at their geographic location. Obviously, they can play a role in also supporting and encouraging the Ukrainian desire to have an independent state. And I think they, together with Sweden, incidentally, have been trying to be involved also in encouraging Belarus to evolve. If these countries evolve in a desirable fashion, that will help also to encourage Russia to engage in actions and accommodations that would make it possible for Russia to become increasingly a part of the West. So there is a constructive role here to be played. But I would emphasize that Europe can play that role only if we're engaged with Europe and we are part of the European security. Because otherwise Europe could become very divided and competitive in making its own separate arrangements, and then in effect maximize the internal weaknesses of Europe and encourage those on the other side who still think in traditional geopolitically imperial categories.
If you did not get enough of the wisdom of Dr. Brzezinski today, you can get some more in the hallway. His book is available for sale. He may be able to sign a couple of copies. And I must say that if I learned one thing today that I didn't fully appreciate before this conversation, it's if at 3 a.m. in the morning, if you have a really, really serious problem and you're looking for someone to get you out of it who has clear thinking even at that time of day, call Zbigniew Brzezinski. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Very good. Very good.